I'm Vernon Adrian Among, and with me is the founder of the Speaking Up Network, Animah Kosai, who is actually in Nottingham, UK. So we're on two ends of the earth, so to speak. It's what time is it over there for you, Animah?
It's just gone 1 o'clock in
Okay,
the
1
afternoon.
p.m. And over here it's 8 p.m. In the evening, just after dinner time for me. So yeah, I'm sitting here with a full stomach after a nice dinner and waiting, ready to get into a good conversation with Animah Kosai, who is the founder of the Speaking Up Network, which is, you can say, the galvanizing of a community of humanitarian centered individuals and organizations who want to basically, work towards a better world where society is much more aware of the concept of psychological safety. So, hence the actual tagline for the Speaking Up Network, which is spaces for globally connected communities who want a better world. So that is what the Speaking Up Network is all about. We bring together people from different parts of the world, as well as from different kinds of disciplines. And among the issues that we've talked about, it's ranged from bullying in the workplace, discrimination, sexual harassment, etc. And in recent times, we've actually tried to keep an eye on what's going on in the world. And this is the second week where we are running kind of like a continuation from last week, where we spoke about the controversy surrounding the Spanish football team, their football federation coach, and a player whom he, in a sense, forced himself on at the prize giving ceremony. Maybe Animah, you'd like to kind of like us a little bit of a background into this particular story. Animah, over to you.
Hi, thanks for that great intro, Vernon. And before I start, I really want to give a big shout out to Jan down. I know she's listening, Jan Cruikshank. One of the things I've known Jan for a few years now. She's in Scotland, and Elaine has just joined. Karita, another familiar face. Thank you. And. Jan is in Scotland, and she runs a group that we're just starting out on the Speaking Up Network, which is a private group in terms of people who want to discuss sexual harassment. And it's probably suitable for people who've experienced it, want to talk about it in a supportive group. And if you go to my comment on this event page, you'll see there's a link if you want to join the group that Jan, with my support, has set up. And Elaine, I want to give a shout out to Elaine as well. Elaine Tan, who's joined us, and Elaine is in Texas. Jan is in Scotland. We are really global, right? And Elaine has also started a group on workplace bullying. I just realized we've not put that link there, because today we're really, really focused on sexual harassment. But if you join the Speaking Up Network, the various groups you can take a look at. And so the three links we've provided, one is to the group that Jan is leading in terms of addressing sexual harassment. Then there's another one that Vernon is leading, which is actually what we do every Thursday, either on Clubhouse or here on LinkedIn Audio, where we're attempting to compile all these events that we've been having and putting them in a place called Sun Sessions. So we've not yet put up last week. I had no computer for a few days, so I couldn't put it up. But last week we had some wonderful speakers who talked about the Spanish kiss, right? We had Lee Chambers here from England, Lisa Barnwell, who's also in the UK, and we had some guests join us and speak as well. And I remember Sandy and Denley, who's in Canada, also spoke about the Spanish kiss. So that's something, a recording that we will put up. If you joined us a month ago, you remember we talked about Barbie, right? The film Barbie, but the issues that it raised, right? I thought that was an incredible conversation, Vernon.
Yeah, incredible.
we had 16 people on the stage at one point, right? Everybody wanted to say something. And that recording we will also put up in the Sun sessions. So the links are there on my comments if you want to go in and have a look. So thank you so much to Vernon, to Jan, to Elaine, who are helping run some of these groups. I just wanted to give a shout out to the wonderful team out there. And we always welcome other people who want to start groups where they can kind of catalog resources and things like that. Lisa's not with us today, Lisa Barnwell. She's running the group, which actually is for male allies. So for men, self-identifying men who want to be better allies, to women and trans people and so on, in terms of whether we're talking about sexual harassment and other issues, right? So I want to give a shout out there, and the link to Lisa's group is also in the comments, because we actually have a really active male allies group here on LinkedIn. I think it's about 40 men or so, all right, from around the world. So it's wonderful. That's a very active group, isn't it, Vernon? I just want to say we're not gonna accept people who want to speak until right towards the end, because today we're doing things a little differently, right, Vernon? It's you and me, and so thank you. If you want to raise your hand, you can do so later, because we really wanted to unpack in a very detailed way, and again, a bit of my expertise on issues around sexual harassment and other forms of harassment. What we see unfolding with the news in terms of the Spanish kiss. And also, a lot of people say, well, this is ever so common. And for some, that's kind of shocking. They didn't know. And we kind of want to unpack that, especially, I think, in a workplace or even organizational, like here, this is a football association, but whether we're talking about clubs, organizations, besides employment, schools and so on, this is common, sexual harassment and other forms of harassment. We see the playbook, and I'm going to go through the playbook that applies to other forms of harassment, including racism, including transphobic, homophobic, ableism. We see a pattern, a bullying, right? Workplace bullying. We see the pattern is very similar in what happened. So I did want to talk a little bit about that. So Vernon, do you want to say anything before you really go into the details?
Yeah, well, first of all, I just want to once again reiterate what the Speaking Up Network is. Speaking Up Network is a platform bringing together communities and individuals from around the globe. We do the Speaking Up Network sessions, which is called the Sun sessions, every Thursday about this time, when Animah and I kind of like throw a spotlight on a particular issue where the psychological safety of a certain target of a group of people are being compromised. And psychological safety is a very, very important thing for all of us. Some of us, many of us, are unfamiliar with the concept, but it's basically about feeling safe exactly where you are and who you are with. Okay, so if your psychological safety is compromised, it could be because you feel discrimination, you feel some kind of aggression, you feel even psychological kinds of harm being placed upon you. Yes, sometimes it might be very difficult for other people around you to sense it. But if you are, in a way, if you feel your psychological safety is compromised, you will feel discounted and diminished and lesser than the other person who has decided to harm you psychologically or even physically. Sometimes it might lead to that. So what we do is we create these conversations, and this particular conversation is all about the controversy surrounding Luis Rubiales, the president of the Spanish Football Federation, and his very inappropriate behavior. Last week we had yellow card for the Spanish kiss, question mark. This week it's a red card for the Spanish kiss, question mark, because it's escalated. It's escalated terribly. And who better to speak about it than the founder of the Speaking Up Network herself, Animah Kosai, who is very much an expert in the area of psychological safety and kinds of inappropriate things that go on in, for one, work environments and in various other places, because it started up with speaking up at work, which was the initial beginnings of this speaking up network, speaking up at work. And when we ran the sessions on Clubhouse and then on LinkedIn Audio Live, Animah decided that she wanted to open up the aperture. So now it's just speaking up. And what we're trying to promote is the speaking up culture, where you are unafraid to speak up truth to power, so to speak. Right, Animah? Perhaps maybe you might like to speak a little bit more about that. The expert herself, Animah, over to you.
Well, thanks, Brendan. I think you described that brilliantly. So I am going to go straight into the topic, because I know that's what people want to hear today. And I've got in front of me this very helpful. It was one of the BBC articles which goes through a timeline. Right. Since Spain beat my team, the Lionesses of England, so me being quite sad that my team didn't win, I didn't actually watch the prize giving ceremony. I went and made coffee instead. But then, of course, later I heard about what happened, and I looked back and I was like, oh my God. As we know, on the 20th of August, Spain. Congratulations, Spain. I think they were fantastic. And I will admit they did play better than the Lionesses and completely deserved to be World Cup champions. And then, of course, later I learned that they have gone through so much. I mean, I thought the Lionesses had gone through so much, but when I read about the environment that the Spanish players had been under, like, wow. So kudos to the Spanish team. So glad they won. And I think what has just happened in terms of Luis Rubiales kissing Yenny Hermoso on the lips is actually quite staggering. And especially for us women, as we witness this and we witness people talking about it, we go, oh no, it's an all too familiar feeling. So I'm going to go through the timeline, and then I'm going to talk about actually what's going on, really, right? On the 20th of August, Spain won the World Cup, and this is when the kiss happened. And at the time, I mean, people are like saying, well, she looked okay. She, so people are saying, oh, she also had her arms there and so on. And then later, she said on TikTok that she didn't like it. Like, she didn't, this is not something she welcomed. She was not comfortable with it. She did not like it, right? So let's just stop there, right? So people might say, well, why didn't she say no? Why did she? So let's remember, first of all, this is on the world stage. This is broadcast around the world. Millions of people are watching this. It's not like at that point, of course, there is the excitement of the moment. Like, you're feeling on such a high. Like, it's not like at that time you can turn around and say no. There's a lot that's going on. And one of the things I want to say very clearly, and I know a report, in fact, I think it was New York Times, just came out a few days ago or last week, talking about sexual assault, right? That victims the most common response is one of being frozen or just not knowing what to do, that state of shock. And that's the way our brain behaves. This is the most natural response. So this whole thing about, well, why didn't you fight back? Why didn't you say no? At that time? You can't. It's for a lot of people, when they're in that situation, it's not just women, it's everyone, right? When something has happened to you, you're sometimes in a state, you're so stunned that it happens, you don't know how to respond to that. So I'm not saying that this is necessarily what happened to her, but possibly. So this whole thing of, well, why didn't she fight back? Why didn't she say no? Even when you talk about rape victims, right? We need to be aware of the most natural response is one of shock, freezing, and also this sense of survival that if you say no or you fight back or you do anything, that might suggest you don't want it, you're not interested, could actually jeopardize your safety. And it's really important to understand that women in particular, and that includes me, have had to navigate the world in a sense of don't upset the guys because they could actually kill us. And that is even worse for people of color. That is even worse for Black women. Do not upset somebody because our lives can be on the line, right? And Black men too, right? I mean, we see that. So I'll come back to the issue of, what happened on the spot. So there is that. So when people say, oh, why didn't she? That's victim blaming, pure and simple. The thing is, why should we not be believing the woman who said, I did not consent to that, right? So I'll go now to the following day, right? So there was a huge outcry. All of Spain was upset, and of course the world. And so on the 21st of August, which is a Monday, after the match, Rubiala says he's sorry. He issues an apology. He says he's sorry for those who were offended. Now, we could go into a whole thing about what apologies look like. But an apology isn't like, well, I'm sorry you were hurt, or I'm sorry you were offended, because what that does is put the onus on the other person, like, oh, you were too sensitive. It's not owning or being accountable for your own behavior. So instead of owning his own behavior, he's just, oh, sorry for those who are offended, right? And we now know that he was pressured to do this because other footballers, even the Spanish, government, prime minister, the deputies, several ministers all said, whoa, right? That is really inappropriate, right? And, the calls for him to step down. So he apologized. And I think it was the Spanish prime minister who said, oh, no, apology is not good enough, right? So a lot of people were still saying, you need to resign. And a few days later, on the 24th of August, FIFA, right, which is the world's football governing body, opens disciplinary action to see his actions, right? Now, so the thing is this. If somebody comes to you and says, hey, you harmed me, you hurt me, or that was sexual harassment, or that was racist, or, there is this sense of, if somebody says that to us, it's very natural for us to get defensive, right? That probably also happened here. And I'll go a little bit into power and privilege in a while. And that we have two choices, right? We can either say, like, acknowledge the harm and say, look, I'm really so sorry, I won't do it again, and learn and grow from it. Or, and this is what happened in this case, be completely defiant and deny everything. And like, no, she consented, I didn't, I'll go a bit more into that. But there's always this choice point. And that makes the difference between it being escalated or it being resolved. Because a lot of people, I know who have come to me after, they've been sexually harassed or assaulted. Well, so let's talk about sexual harassment, right? Or other forms of harassment at work. And I generally ask them, what do you want? And the most common answer, and it's amazing how often HR doesn't ask this question, right? The most common answer is, I want that person to apologize. I want that person to acknowledge that I was harmed. I want that person to hear me. I want to be heard. And it's amazing how rare that platform, that space is given to someone who's been harmed. They want to be heard. They want to be believed. They want to be validated. It's not a lot to ask, right? And it's not a lot to give. But it's sadly so rare, especially at workplaces. It's almost like you go to HR, and the next thing you know, without asking, HR goes, "Okay, we're going to go into an investigation. We're going to and like, you need to prove this, you need to prove that," and the person who was harmed is like, "Wait a minute, So this is why, for some of us, we talk about restorative justice as opposed to rehabilitative justice. As opposed to retributive justice. So it's not in terms of punishment, but to really support everyone here, because in some cases, I'm going to say it wasn't intended, and the person was a bit, let's just say, stupid or unaware, or they're still learning. And yes, we can say, well, men should know better, but a lot don't, right? But this is the opportunity for them to learn, and if they're open to learning and become more aware and not do it again, how incredible that is. So this is that very first response for a workplace, whether somebody in HR, is really, really important, that the person coming to them and say they've been harmed feels supported and believed. And there's also the opportunity to educate the person who harmed, or the people around them, right? So here in the UK, there's a lot of emphasis on educating men around sexism and misogyny and things like that, rather than pushing them out and saying, that was completely wrong, but without giving them the pathway to be better. So this is, I'm still, by the way, in the early days of the Rubiales issue here, right? So, but he didn't take that path. He didn't choose to say, he said he apologized, but he wasn't really sorry. We know that now. And he said, instead, what does he do? So he denied it. He said, I didn't force myself on her. She consented to it. So he's denying that he harassed her. And one of the things I want to talk about, right, Vernon, is what is harassment? What is sexual harassment? Really, right? And if you look, it's defined in different policies in different companies. It's defined, in various parts of the world. Quite a lot of countries do not have laws when it comes to harassment, other than criminal harassment, but ordinary harassment in workplaces and all that. A lot of countries do not have laws yet. There are some states in Australia, there's some states in Canada. Sexual harassment maybe a little bit more, like Malaysia very recently, at the end of last year, enacted a law in terms of sexual harassment. The United Kingdom does not have a law other than what's in the Equality Act, and that's not as extensive, right? So there are many countries that don't have laws, but most workplaces do have something or other, right? So I'll just read I'll tell you what the definition is. So essentially, it's basically whether it's words, conduct, gestures, even psychological acts or games, which have the impact of humiliating, demeaning, intimidating, or adversely affecting a person's dignity. Right? Now that's harassment. And you can add on to that there has a racial undertone, that there has a sexist undertone, there has a ableist undertone, a homophobic, a transphobic undertone. That basic fundamental is the same. Right? And if we're talking about sexual harassment, we just add the words of a sexual nature or conduct of a sexual nature. Right? That has that impact. And it's not necessarily just a person's dignity. It can be a group of people's dignity. So, for example, trans people, right? If it's all about, people, even though there's no trans person there specifically that is being humiliated, but a statement that is uttered that is transphobic, that in itself is a form of harassment. And also it's about creating a hostile environment. So, for example, a hostile or toxic work environment. And an example I can give is, let's say a bunch of people are standing around a water cooler in the office and they're cracking a joke. Maybe it's a sexist joke, right? And we all have been in the olden days, right, in these situations. So, and it could be a mixed group, men and women. They're cracking a sexist joke, and the women may be laughing, ha 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 ha, and so the men think, oh, it's not a problem, right? But it could actually make the people who are listening, who see that interaction, feel really uncomfortable. So that's what we talk about, the toxic environment, or it creates a hostile environment. So it makes, for example, if it's a sexist joke, maybe women feel in that workplace unsafe, or they feel othered, they feel they are less, safe, right? So that's what we would call harassment. And if you notice, I talk about impact. I didn't mention intention. And this is what a lot of people get wrong. And this probably included Rubiales, right? I didn't intend to sexually harass her or sexually assault her. I thought she consented. And this is where it gets really murky in many of the cases we look at, because they think the woman consented. And this is where we need to talk about consent. It's really important that everyone, men and women and non-binary folk, understand what is consent. Does the person consent? And the best way, if you know the person really well, maybe that's okay, but it's to ask first, are you okay if I do this? You know, in Malaysia, we've talked about this a lot, right, Vernon? Even the act of shaking hands, there may be some people, and that's both women and men, may not be comfortable shaking hands with a person of the opposite gender, right? So the best thing, it's almost like a little game we play, right, Fern? And we kind of see, like, we sort of slowly put our hand out to see if it's going to be taken. And the person, if they don't feel comfortable shaking your hand, they will instead put their hand on their heart and just sort of bow, you know, give a little nod, you know, like, and smile. And you get it. It's understood. There is nobody feels offended. People get it, right? So, but that's also because it's a cultural thing that's understood. So you go, oh, okay, that's fine. So that's an example of how consent is like, can I do this? No, I can't, right? And the best way is to ask, is just to ask. But also, and I want to talk about power, that works if the people are more or less of the same power field or the same hierarchy, same level, their peers. But when you have someone who's really senior and who can determine your fate. So, for example, the president of the Spanish football federation, you know, he can decide whether or not you're going to play the next game and all that. You may not feel comfortable saying, I don't consent. So we really need to understand the power dynamics, the power differentials. So for people in power, and that includes, and when I say people in power, I'm going to add the word privilege here. So we talk about power hierarchy, generally you'd see in organizations and workplaces, but we also need to understand how it's different men and women. Men are more dominant in positions of power. White people are more dominant in terms of positions of power, right? For the most part, cis straight people are more dominant in positions of power. So people who may not, you know, women, people of color, black people, so on, would not have the same ability to say no in the larger dynamic. So this power privilege is really, really important to understand in terms of consent. And then, yeah.
I just want to say something, Animah, if I may interrupt. That whole idea of privilege, I mean, like, that's a concept that only came into being in recent times. And very, very often, we're not aware of the certain privileges that you have over other people. Like for me here in Malaysia, because I speak English and it's basically the language that I grew up in, I do feel I have a privilege because I speak English. Because when I speak English and because I speak it well, I have the ability to influence other sources of power and influence. And therefore, I continue to remind myself of this privilege that I have. It's something that I'm aware of, and this is the navigation that each of us has to do, especially men, especially white men, especially you know basically white men. Well, even here in Malaysia, where we have different races, we need to be aware of the privileges we have in different kinds of environments. And so I think herein lies that secret weapon, or that quality of empathy and compassion, knowing that you have an advantage over somebody else. And this is what is going on here with Luis Rubiales. He has power over the player. He goes ahead with what he thought he had the right to do. And then he's told that it's inappropriate. He apologizes, and it's not a really authentic apology because he is apologizing for how the other person felt, not what he did, right? And then it spiraled out of control, as Animah will describe further on. Thanks, Animah. I thought I just want to bring that up.
I think that's great. And I think we all have privilege in some ways or other, right? I did write the Privilege Game article last year at some stage. And I think quite a lot of people, when they looked at it, like, oh God, I didn't think I had privilege in that area. You know, whether we, for example, not being disabled and being able to see or walk down the street, you know, easily being able to navigate that, that's a privilege in itself. You know, having an education, a degree, that's a privilege. So there's many layers of privilege. You know, being you know, legally documented in the country that you're living in, that's a privilege, right? Having the ability to get credit and stuff like that, that's a privilege, which some people don't have. Having a home versus not being able, you know, being homeless, that is a privilege. So I think, and of course, wealth, socioeconomic status, the ability in this very post-colonial world, and now post in a modern sense, the ability to speak English, right? And speak English well. And I'm aware that's a big privilege of mine. So these are, I mean, thanks for sharing that, Vernon. I want to go now to what happened next. So the following, which was this week, right? So what was also happening, I think over the weekend, the 81 players, women players for the Spanish football team were saying, okay, until he resigns, we refuse to play for Spain. And by the way, one male Spanish player did that. So that's interesting. One man and 81 women. And so which do you think is a more courageous sex, right? I mean, like, but anyway, so this is huge. And because of that, the RFEF, the Spanish Federation, now is threatening to sue these 81 women for refusing to play, right? And this is weaponizing. I mean, sometimes you see it in, you know, threatening to sue for defamation and all that in terms of Me Too. We saw that a lot. So this is weaponizing the law in order to silence, to stop people speaking up, to stop people standing their ground. And also what I felt, this act of threatening to sue or you know, mounting a lawsuit was a big signal to the male players, like, don't you dare, because we're going to sue you, right? And I, you know, whether it worked or not, but that is a common weapon. And that's an attack of sorts. And of course, he's the president of the federation, right? And he spoke at this conference of the Federation, and he said in Spanish, "I'm not going to resign." And he said this several times: "I won't resign. I won't step down. I won't resign." And there was applause, right? And you know, so there were people clapping, and then others were questioning, but why were they clapping? There were even some women clapping, you know, but a lot of women looked upset. And then again, this goes back to, why were they clapping? And this is, if you think about it in an organizational context, you feel forced to or compelled to support the people in power, even though you don't agree with them, because you need to think of you need to survive, your livelihood, you know. And I would not necessarily condemn anybody who feels that they need to do that, because everyone has their own, you know, can I afford to lose this job, for example? Because that is a very real possibility. In the United States, it's even harder because, unlike, you know, many of us in other countries, they don't have universal health care. So losing a job also means maybe losing health benefits and so on. So that's even more big deal, right? It's actually harder to speak up in the United States in terms of workplaces than it is in many countries, you know, in Europe and other. But there are other factors, you know, which I can talk about at some stage. And that surprises many people when I tell them this. So then Okay, my computer's gone to sleep. Oh, well. His mother, right, then announces that she's on a hunger strike. She's going on into a fast and she's not going to eat. This was on Monday, and I don't know what everybody knows. Just comment. She says she wasn't going to eat until Hermoso drops these lies, right? So now I want to talk about Darvo. So Darvo, DARVO, stands for deny, attack, almost like the first thing someone who's harassed does if they choose not to accept, acknowledge, and apologize, take the blame, and so on. So they go into a denial mode, and this is common again in other forms of harassment, not just sexual harassment. So first to and workplace harassment would be attacks in terms of, oh, she's so for example, there's victim blaming. Now that's attacking, right? Oh, she asked for it, she dressed this way, or they led me on, or why did she get into the car? Why did she go to the hotel room? Or in terms of workplace bullying, what's commonly an attack would be, well, that person isn't a performer anyway. Or, in Wells Fargo, what was happening was the attacks were about, oh, well, they were 5 minutes late to work, so all these kind of little HR misdemeanors suddenly come up as a justification for taking action and attacking somebody who dared whistleblow, who dared speak truth to power, who dared to speak up on sexual harassment, workplace bullying, and so on, right? So this is the attacking, and it's designed to ensure the person who spoke up retreats and backs down and stops. But also what it does, it isn't just about that person. It sends a signal to every other person in that organization that if you do this, if you speak up about this, this is what's going to happen to you. You're going to be attacked. You might lose your job. You might lose your friends. You may be, put in another department, which is less, there's less career opportunities. So in other words, you're going to get punished. That's a silencing tactic, this whole attacking thing. I'm at A, right? So there's RVO, and they come together. And this is the most interesting one, right? Reverse victim, reverse offend. And we saw this. We saw this in the Spanish kiss case, right? So now, and we saw this with Weinstein. We saw this with Kevin. We saw this with just about any person who has offended, who's an offender, right? Who's harassed somebody, who's harmed somebody. They turn down and say, poor me, I'm going to lose my job. I'm no longer going to be any president of the Spanish FA, or my production company is now going bankrupt. Poor me, look, I cannot get any more acting parts. So, or my reputation is destroyed. This is playing victim. And then what they do is, she did this to me, right? It's because she accused me of sexual harassment. Now look at me, right? And then, so it gets even worse. People, in his case, his mother gets involved. He brings his mother, daughters, like, oh, my daughter is now speaking up for me. Or what about my poor children? Now I can't afford them to send them to, some private school or whatever it is, right? And so when they bring in the families, I think this is really manipulative, right? Because it's like the attention is no longer on Rubiales. It's like, oh, look, I'm suffering too. My mother, she's starving. And if anything happens to her, whose fault is it? It's Hermoso's fault. It's the Spanish, their family and children, when they sexually harassed, when they harmed somebody. But no, they're making it out to be the accuser's fault. And so this Darvo is so incredibly common. I mean, we've seen people, you know, shed tears, just to twist it. R. Kelly did that, right, in an interview on US TV. So recognizing the tears and making out like being a victim, so turning the tables, it's deeply manipulative. But guess what? The number of times I've seen HR fall for this, I've seen people in executive management positions fall for that reverse victim and offender, right? Especially position of power like Rubiales, right? Because the higher up, you've got more to fall, right? More to lose. So they protect each other, and this is what we call institutional betrayal. And one of the things I want to share, I mean, I've known many people who've shared their stories with me. The deepest hurt, the deepest cut isn't actually the original sexual harassment or harassment. It is the sense of being betrayed by someone they trusted, in this case, their employer, right? Or the organization. Like they expected that company or organization to look after them, right? And it's the same with the US gymnast. I've seen this happen. Any famous case you can think of, it's happened time and time again. They were let down by their employer. And then there's this sense of, who can I trust? No one is helping me. And this is, I want to mention Jennifer Freyd, Professor Jennifer Freyd of the University of Oregon. She coined the term DARVO, and she also coined the term institutional betrayal. And she wrote a book called Blind to Betrayal, where she describes this. The deepest cut is the betrayal. So this is where, when I talk to employers, organizations, I say, you have the capacity to create even more harm than the harasser in the first place. And that's what you need to do. You need to put your duty is not to protect the person who is harassing. Your duty is to protect everybody. Because you talked about psychological safety, right, Fern, at the beginning?
Yes, I did.
The workplace has to be safe. Employees need to feel safe at work. And if management HR are not doing their job and ensuring this, then they're seriously letting down, their employees. So I'll stop there. I've mentioned several concepts, so yeah, I'll stop.
Yeah, thanks, Animah. Yeah, really helpful. And I just want to, kind of like loop back to that whole idea of the organization, probably thinking among themselves, this is all getting messy, let's quell it all down. And that's when perhaps, the lower ranking person becomes the sacrificial lamb. And this is where it really sucks big time. Yep. So people who lead, people who run organizations are in a place to ensure that whatever happens, justice should prevail. And if the organization or the boss or the leader is thinking that there's more at stake to lose the higher ranking person, then things are just gonna get worse. So with what's happening, it kind of like got worse once he felt he had the he his back he had the support of some people in his workplace, which is the Football Federation of Spain. And so that is why he felt he had the privilege to do that. He was basically, asserting his privilege in a very unfair and unjust way. I also want to call upon this whole idea that we might think that women um, might have allowed for it to happen and then changed their minds. You know, I just want us to remember that when you are beholden to somebody, you will quite naturally take that position. But the ramifications of taking that position further down the road on your own well-being, right? You may live with regret. You may live with a warped sense of how things should be, how things should be in a good way. And so I really want for us guys to really put into perspective that whole idea of somebody who's hurt. Because I've had conversations with Anima, and I must say that I've come around to actually changing my mind about certain things. Because when we used to have talks, I used to say that offendedness can be weaponized, right? But yes, it can be weaponized. But I think we should give the benefit of the doubt to the person who's saying he or she is hurt, right? And we can only hope that the hurt is real. And I'm very sure that the hurt is real, even if it is a hurt that doesn't, it's not a humiliation is a hurt. And if you're constantly humiliated over and over again, which is what has happened with women in the patriarchic world, so they have, in a sense, normalized it. But if you were the father girl or woman who has hurt, you would feel for them because you would empathize with them. And so men need to find a way to build their empathy muscle so that we don't do the things that women in our midst might feel psychologically at risk. This is the thing that we need to come around to as guys. I thought I'd just like to say that. Back to you, Hanima.
Thank you for Vernon for unpacking that, because I think it's really important. The world has changed, but in some ways it hasn't. And I'm speaking as a woman, right? I think women have always felt hurt by, let's say, sexist remarks, or harmed by sexual harassment. But for a very long time, women kept quiet. And there were reasons for that. I mean, some did speak up, but because they were the minority, I mean, you saw the backlash very, very quickly, right? Those who would dare to speak up. I'm just thinking, Anita Hill, for example, and Clarence Thomas, right, the US Supreme Court. And that was way back. That was a time when it was like, women had to learn to keep their place because it was very, very much more male dominated, right? And, whether we're talking about mothers and grandmothers, and so glad to see Melissa in the audience, because we were talking about this yesterday, to stay safe, it basically meant, or to be able to climb career ladder, you kind of had to accept certain things. So even me as a young lawyer, I had to learn, in the patriarchal world, I had to learn, oh, this is the way it is for women. At work, we just have to put up with it, right? Now, younger women today, thank God, are saying, no, we're not putting up with that, right? So in that sense, it has changed. And of course, older women like myself and I'm saying, enough. I'm not taking this anymore. I might have accepted it, 20 years ago, but no, not now. And it's not that it's hurting more now compared to before. It's like we found our voice. And it's a collective voice. And this is the whole thing, the actors speaking up. And now men, and I know this sounds gendered, but we'll keep it like that, right? Men are suddenly waking up to, wait, what? Like, we talent on stuff that they've done for years, right? And that's what privilege is like, the ability to do things and not think that it might be harming people because nobody told them. So now men are becoming aware, and again, as I said, they have a choice. They can listen, learn, and go, oh my God. And you know what? I'm so grateful right now as youth. I can think of quite a number of people as a woman, right, who are learning to listen and going, wow, I have no idea. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry you're going through this, right? They are now starting to open their ears and eyes and going like, now they realize that women navigate very different landscape, although We all live in the same world, the same workplace, the same city. We're on the same commute, right? Going on a train may be a different experience for a woman compared to a man when it's crowded and so on, right?
And it's this thing about having conversations, right?
Yeah.
Because I mean, like, if I didn't ask you, if I didn't speak up to the idea in my head that there is this thing called offendedness, and we didn't have that conversation about how offendedness can be something that I thought could be weaponized, but you pointed out to me that it could be my own assumption. And it's these assumptions that we make that we need to check ourselves on, you know, assuming that we have privilege, assuming that we have the right to do this when actually we don't, assuming that what we just didn't put somebody in a moment of discomfort or feeling at risk. And so it's this mindfulness that everybody talks about, which actually involves the ability to know what kind of an effect your presence and behavior and actions and even words might have on the other person, who's the target of your behavior or words or action. Yep. So yeah, back to you, Animah. Sorry.
I think like we've been talking for almost an hour. And normally, we have several speakers and invite people from the floor. And maybe it's time to do that. I mean, today's a bit rare. Like, I just take center stage and speak the whole time. So we departed from our normal, listening to other voices. And I felt also it's because what we've been witnessing really needs unpacking. I was sort of happy to share, my experience in addressing this, in workplaces and in communities and so on. So shall we ask if anybody wants to raise their hand and join us on stage?
Indeed, yeah. And then also there's the Jamboard, which we forgot to kind of like remind people about, where they can leave messages, statements, responses that they would rather write than actually speak out. So, but if anybody wants to, come up on stage and join us and speak to the topic or anything that any of us said, please do. It'd be wonderful to have you join us. You need to raise your hand. We can't invite you. So do raise your hand if you would like to join us, please. Yeah. Also, there was that. Did I talk about the video that was taken at the coach?
Which video was that?
Okay, it was the video. Okay, so meanwhile, there is this insistence that he didn't deserve the treatment that he was getting, right? And so then his supporters or his people who felt he was being victimized began to dig up all kinds of things. Like, for instance, one of the suggestions was that Yenny Hermoso herself was the one who grabbed him and lifted him up in the air. But when you study the movement, he actually jumped on her, But these people are saying that it was she who lifted him up in the air, which was wrong. The other thing that they used against Yenny Hermoso was video shots in the bus after the prize giving ceremony, I guess, when they were going back to their hotel or whatever it was. She was coming onto the bus. She had a big smile on her face, and people were cheering her and teasing her about the kiss, and she was smiling. Okay, and then he comes on, and they and the women, the women players also chant his name in kind of like support. Okay, but you must remember something here, right? This is in the euphoria of the moment where the women probably had pushed aside or denied what had happened, okay, and decided to just hang on to the good stuff, okay. And we can do that if we want to, but that's called denial. And over time, if we keep on denying certain things, they just get worse, okay. So this is the reason why I say bad behavior from men and boys is because bad behavior has been normalized. It's because these things that most men and boys who are not aware of their actions and words uh, think that it's okay, and so they continue to do it. and this continues to, in a way, psychologically oppress, women, and put them in a psychologically, compromised space. So this is where we need to be aware and mindful of the complicated situations that exist there. If Luis Rubiales had genuinely understood his inappropriate behavior and genuinely apologized, everything would have settled and that would be it. But unfortunately, the mess, machoism, of this Luis Rubiales, basically took over any sense of compassion or empathy. And this is what happened there. And yes, therefore, it needs to be called out. Enough of me. Over to you,
Yeah,
Animah. Mhm.
anybody wants to raise their hands, go ahead. It's okay, bringing Anna up, but I just want to complete that it's it's not just one act, right? I mean, so it's not just one act. It's essentially a build up, and in the work that I've done, in terms of investigating, for example, sexual harassment or other forms of harm in the workplace, it's an accumulation of things, right? It's not just one thing and that's it. These are built over time, and this is why when we have a strong speak up culture, the thing is, try to nip bad behavior in the bud early on. So maybe something really simple, like making a sexist remark may not be a big deal compared to putting, somebody on the lips at a big, football event. But this is the thing: if you stop people and educate them with the small things, it's not going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So this man, right, has been able to do this for probably decades and hadn't been stopped till he gets to this point. And he's going, what? So we're calling him out at a really, really late stage. If we actually educate people right at the beginning, early on, and whether we're talking about when they're boys or whether, they're young people in the workplace, then it's not going to get like this, right? So I think part of it, and that again speaks to privilege, if you've never been called out, or people dare not, right, because of the power distance and everything, they dare not speak up, then these people are never going to learn. They're never going to learn to be better and all that until it gets to this point, right? By which time it's so huge, it's escalated. I just want to say that. So I'm so conscious we've got Anna and Karita here on stage, so I'll stop. Back to you, Vernon.
Okay, thanks, Animah. Thank you very much. Yes, wonderful to have Anna and Karita on stage. I'm sorry if I mispronounce your names. Yeah, Anna, thank you for coming up on stage, and perhaps you can introduce yourself and then speak to the topic or anything that you've heard thus far. Over to you, Anna.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I was just thinking about, I often help individuals with speaking up in their workplaces, but the stuff that I help people with, it's not even speaking up when there's an issue or when there's a really bad challenge. It's simply speaking up at all. And this can be, when they've got an idea or when they have got something to share or they've got an opinion. And I still see that there's a lot of people who really even struggle with that. So I wonder, how much of this stuff actually still goes completely under the radar, because if you're struggling to speak up in that kind of situation where in theory you're not speaking up about anything that's difficult or controversial, I would think that it would be even harder, or you're even more unlikely to speak about something that was more difficult or controversial.
Thanks, Anna. I think that's a great question, because because we're talking about harm here, that's already very big stakes, right? So you're absolutely right, and this is why when we talk about psychological safety, so there's this book by Timothy R. Clark called 4 Stages of Psychological Safety, and the 4 stages are inclusion safety, so that's stage 1, and then there's learner safety, and I'm trying to remember the third one. The fourth one is challenger safety. So we've been actually actually talking about the fourth stage, which is the biggest, whether, you want to talk about something that's unsafe or you're disagreeing with where the company's going. That's more like challenger, disruptive type of speaking up. And it's very hard to do if you, right at the beginning, don't feel safe to share an idea or ask a question, which is that very first bit. We call it inclusion safety. And that's why, DEI, for example, is very relevant. It all intersects, right? So for women in a very male-dominated environment, if they're not made to feel, they belong, they don't feel safe because people are cracking out sexist jokes and things like that, that inclusion safety hasn't been met. And the other thing I want to talk about is, for example, introversion or neurodivergence, right? So some people may have difficulty processing certain things in a meeting where a lot of things are happening, or they may be very shy, introverted, or they've tried speaking, or their language. It could be a language issue, right? So maybe somebody has an accent that doesn't fit, let's say, the Queen's English in the UK, or their command of English in an English-speaking place is not so good. So they may sort of back off or shy away, right? They may be suffering anxiety. So there are many reasons why people don't speak up. So kudos on you doing the work to support the individuals. What I try and do is actually get people like bosses and managers and people to understand that there are people in their team that are less likely to speak up. So how do they create the environment which is more inclusive, where everyone feels safe? And getting to understand why some people may not speak up. They may have in their heads they want to observe and process anything before they've got something to say. And again, that could also speak to neurodivergence and so on. So when bosses understand that and not expect everyone to be brave or bold or an expert or whatever it is to be out there, then they will sort of realize, okay, so it's how you set your meetings, it's how you set your, even presentations. So people who perhaps are colorblind or process things differently can understand, right? So that's why DEI is a really important part of this too.
Yeah, and if I can add to that as well, I mean, like, because I'm a corporate trainer, and I've worked with fresh graduates who have had confidence issues, right? So it's because they're not confident about their language skills. They're not confident about whether or not their ideas matter. They're not confident about whether they're worth anything in the room. And these are the things, I guess, that make people go silent, because they feel that if they speak up, they might be making themselves look bad. They might be disrupting without contributing value. So there is a self-esteem and confidence issue thing happening there. And I must say that usually these self-esteem and confidence issues have arisen because these people might not have felt psychological safety in very many moments in their lives, to the points where their voices were not valued or welcomed. And this is the thing that we all need to be aware of, as I'm sure you are yourself, and as a as a communications person. But it's actually trying to listen as much as it is to speak up that is so important. Yeah. So I thought I'd share
that's why we put listening first, right? So
Yes.
I mean, one of the things, as you were speaking, I suddenly, it's how do, let's say, bosses, for example, respond when somebody does share an idea, and if the response is to immediately shut down, or the colleagues start laughing, or like everybody say, how can you not know this? Responses like that, they silence, and if a person has experienced that several times, they might withdraw. And the other thing, because we're talking a lot about gender here, still women, scientifically proven, women are more likely to be interrupted at work, spoken over, being mansplained. So all those factors, and I've been having a lot of conversations with men to try and get them to understand this, so that they don't speak over. And the other thing is this: women are less likely to be heard. So when a man says the same thing, everybody goes, "Oh yeah, that's a great idea," and the woman's like, "Hello, I just said that. How was I not, seen?" So this is where we need people to kind of understand this, the biases that exist, which causes. So while it's also great to work with people to increase their confidence, we really need people in positions of power to learn how to listen, to learn how to be more inclusive, to learn how to stop others from dominating or interrupting, and so on. So what we would call sort of that inclusive culture. So that goes back to the inclusion stage of psychological safety. That's just the beginning.
Absolutely
really
right. I mean, I am sometimes bowled over by my sense of maybe overconfidence. And I often put it down to the fact that, I had a big brother who was very affirming and validating of me, seriously. So I think, when you are growing up and you actually experience, affirmation and validation and inclusivity, as you say, right? That actually is how I guess individuals can find their voice and contribute in meaningful ways to the conversations that go on. Yeah. So yeah, as and when we can, we should be always, in a way, enabling and affirming and validating and uplifting people, and that's when we all win together, right? Yeah. So okay, so Anna, do you want to respond to anything that either Anima or I have said to what you just spoke about? Anna? Okay, I think Anna's might be busy. I'm going to pass the mic to Karita. Karita, I hope I pronounced your
Shall we
name
invite
right.
Karita speak?
Yes, I forgot to unmute. Yes, please, Karita, if you'd like to speak, over to you. If you could introduce yourself and then speak to the topic or anything you've heard. Vernon, done speaking.
Thank you so much, both Animah and Vernon, for bringing up this very important topic. And I want to acknowledge you both also for building the bridge from this incident to the workplace. And I've been in the both worlds, so I've felt compelled to share something. And my background is I'm a football champion in Finland, former, a long time ago, and a young female manager in the corpo. And I've seen so much of the arrogance and bullying in both worlds. So it's great that this becomes hopefully a movement to discuss this theme further. I'm also a corporate trainer, having a toolbox to address arrogance, like in this case, and toxic environments. And it's a huge theme that is silenced in so many workplaces just because of the power games. And I think the power is sort of what makes things go wrong, because those in power belittle so many people around them. And as women, it tends to be harder to speak up, even if you see and witness misconduct and poor behavior. So it takes more courage to speak up. And I've not been the silenced one, but I've hit my head a few times, but still willing to sort of address injustice. So thank you again for creating a wonderful discussion around this. Back to you, Animah.
Thank you very much, Karita. Thank you for affirming us. That is something that, we really appreciate. And I hope that both Animah and I hope that we'll see you in our rooms in the weeks ahead. It's always on Thursday nights, nights in Malaysia. This time on Thursday, wherever you are in the world, is when we have our Speaking Up Network sessions, the Sun sessions. If you would like more information and maybe even have a listen to some of the previous Sun sessions we've had, you can either go to speakingup.network and register to be a member, where we have different groups, having conversations about various issues. Some of them are, specific to certain areas, like, for instance, environmentalism, social justice, etc., etc. You can also, if you speaking up dot network is where the platform is. There is also
We've got the links. Yeah, the links are in my comments.
okay, yeah, okay. And then there's also the bit.ly/sun sessions, which changes every week, so that there's this easier, very quick thing that people can get to, which is bit.ly/sun in capitals sessions. Sun sessions in one word will take you to also various links that will bring you to previous sessions that we've had. The Speaking Up Network platform is very much in alpha mode, so it's still a work in progress. Hence, the Google Docs also is also kind of like a work in progress, because Animah and I do this on a voluntary basis. Well, not voluntary, but it's something we're building, and so
Shout out to Philip Thorne.
Okay, yeah, and shout out to
Our
Philip who's
senior
building the.
CTO, yeah.
Yes, and we are hoping for it to be as good as it can get, in order to enable and facilitate what I like to say is intersectional activism, or humanitarian centered communities, right? So that is what the Speaking Up Network is all about. Sun, S-U-N, Speaking Up Network. So that's why it's called the Sun Sessions, which is this moment, this event that you're at, which happens every Thursday. Animah, over to you. Anything for Karita?
Yeah,
Sorry.
I want to thank Karita, because I was quite curious. Maybe you're going to write something about this. Being not Finnish football champion yourself. It would be really interesting to hear your experiences on this. I want to ask if Jan would like to come up and say anything. So I said right at the beginning of this session that Jan Krishank, who is in the audience, is our... Yes, she's coming up. Okay. Allowed to speak. Here you go. Hi, Jan. You want to unmute yourself and say something?
Sorry, you can tell I'm not used to LinkedIn. Welcome for inviting me up to speak. I think it's been a great session and really interesting to listen to. You've validated everything that I've talked about for years. I think the time has finally come that women's safety has to be considered more than a man's reputation, and it's long overdue that women have to stop being seen as being over emotional and overreacting, and consent has to be taken far more seriously. So thank you for a very enlightening session, and I look forward to seeing anyone on the Speak Up Network sexual harassment site, and look forward to talking to you all in a safe space. And thank you. Over to you, Animah.
Thank you, Jan. Big shout out to her. If you're not following her, please do, because she talks a lot about sexual harassment, including on the site formerly known as Twitter. She's got a big following there. And she shares her videos as well as someone who was sexually assaulted by a colleague in a previous workplace, and has had a lot to say about that. I mean, you've had coverage in the Scotland Times and so on, right, Jan? Do you want to say anything about that for people listening?
Yes, I went public with my story afterwards, because the whole setup after I reported sexual harassment and sexual assault by a call, I experienced Darvo, I experienced the institutional betrayal, I experienced the damage that was done to me. Far more than the harassment was the backlash I received for speaking out. And I went public because the company were adamant that they were going to dismiss me, get rid of me and silence me, and I was going to be deemed to be a problem that was made to disappear. So I made sure I didn't disappear. I was very vocal. I gave my story to the press in order for people to see why women don't speak out when they're sexually harassed, because the backlash you get once you go public is absolutely horrendous. It just about killed me. I made videos so that other women and men too, because men also get sexually harassed. And I just wanted people to know that they're not alone. There is support out there, although it's not easy to find. But if you reach out to other victims, then they'll all assist you to help you find the support that you need to help you get through it. And I'm just really, really grateful that this is now becoming more public and people are calling out the bad behaviour and the wrongdoing.
Thanks so much, Jen. Thanks so much for speaking up when you did. And also, it takes a lot of courage to speak up when the odds are against you. And I wish you continued power in what you're doing to bring awareness. And what also you're doing is, in effect, showing people that you can speak up and come out of a painful episode in your life. Power to you, Jen. Animah?
Thank you very much.
Most welcome.
If anyone wants to follow me, I'm on the platform formerly known as Twitter, and my username is @LittleJohnHere. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah. So yeah, we are still welcoming people. Michael Yin, I see one. Yeah, a male ally. Michael is from Singapore. He's currently in Malaysia, and I'm supposed to have a beer with him later on. So if you want to come up and share some of the thoughts.
Michael's a great ally.
Yeah.
And if anybody else wants to raise your hand before we leave, or have we embarrassed him and he's like, oh. He's probably on. Oh no, he's not in Singapore. He's normally at a train at this time. See, I even know your
yeah.
habits. Okay.
Okay. Did you finish the timeline? So basically, where are things now at this moment with regards to Luis Rubiales? The mother is, locked herself in a church, right? We don't know the state of the mother, but I saw a news feed on television with the whole crowd gathered outside the church. I think there were both detractors and supporters. So it's basically become quite a divisive thing. It's kind of sad that Luis Rubiales has allowed it to kind of escalate to this point in time. It's a really, really, I don't know what else to say about the fella.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't know she was in hospital. BBC reports that Luis Rubiales' mother discharged from hospital after going on hunger strike. She was admitted yesterday. And yeah, that's about it. She's not been feeling well because of the heat and everything else, said Father Antonio, a local priest. Her feet had become swollen. She was very tired. She also became very anxious. And I think... Oh yeah, I just remembered. Someone sent me a message yesterday, and I won't name this person. This person's in the US, a woman in the US, and she said to me when she knew I was doing this, is I'm looking for a message now, and I'll read out. It's in relation to the mother. She says, she asked if we could also cover the women who protect the men who harass, and the lack of support from other women when someone is a survivor of harassment. It's all too common. Some who need attention from men tend to never support women survivors. John, you're clapping. Did you want to say, because I know you've experienced this yourself. Do you want to say anything to that?
Yes, I think it's absolutely shameful that he's allowed his mother to be dragged into this. And I think that it's also shameful that she's taken herself into the situation. I think that especially narcissistic men tend to play the victim, the sob story, drag others in, and paint the real victim as some sort of scarlet woman who tempted them, who didn't make it clear they weren't consenting, and then somehow, like you explained earlier, their lives are ruined by this woman daring to challenge their behaviour. And the betrayal you feel when other women support a man who has no boundaries when it comes to women's consent is really, it's unbelievable, the damage, the betrayal that you feel when other women support a man who behaves in this way. It is, it's unbelievable. I haven't got enough words to say how badly it makes you feel. But also in my case, the man who sexually assaulted me, when it came to the grievance hearing, cried, said that I was a temptress who had led him on, and that the stress was now causing his wife to be ill, and she had suspected breast cancer. He lied and used
wow.
to get.
Oh, I'm so sorry that happened to you, Jan. I mean, like, gosh, I have no words that
and then,
you can, yeah.
The panel judged me as being some sort of temptress who had led this monastery, and now it was my fault that his wife suspected she had breast cancer because of all the stress that I had put her through, because I dared to report it.
Oh, I'm so sorry that you had to go through all this.
Yeah, that's just, yeah.
There's no limits to some people, no limits.
Yeah, and that's so manipulative. That is really hurtful. Yeah, so women who don't support other women, and I mean, I think we've had these conversations before, right? Women who will say, "Oh, well, you know, that's not sexual harassment," or like, "I'm okay with that." And, you know, every woman is different. I mean, some women are fine with certain behaviors by men. They don't speak for all women, and I think that's deeply disappointing. Or when, you know, we don't support each other. And again, I do hope that that is changing. And I'm also hopeful by the more men who are beginning to learn and listen. And you know, I know, you know, Jan, your husband is incredible. As more men discover how, you know, some of the women in their lives, whether we're talking about wives or daughters or sisters or children and so on, friends, have been harmed, and then we say, well, you know, examine your own behavior, and you know, if you see any of your friends, your guy friends, who are doing things or saying things which are completely inappropriate and demeaning to women, you know, educate them, call them in, try to get them to see how that can be harmful and hurtful. And I think there is a momentum picking up, isn't there? So I find that hopeful. Yeah. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, thanks, Animah. And
allies, sorry, Edgar.
Carry on.
Fantastic male allies who are call out the bad behaviour of other men. It means tremendous amount to victims to have a man stand up and say, well, actually, no, your behaviour is out of order. And I think that's what's going to create the changes when more men start calling out the behaviour of men.
Oh, I absolutely agree with you, Jan, because, you know, it does something to you when that kind of allyship comes into you know, existence. Because I know I went to Australia for my last year of high school and university education, and when I was basically confronted by racists, my white friends would step in, and just feeling that or seeing that was an incredible thing for me to maintain a sense of self, and, you know, feeling like, you know, I'm not alone. And yeah, so I just want you to know that yeah, that's such an important thing to bring up. Yeah. Yeah. Karita, is there anything you'd like to say before we, I guess, I pass the mic to Animah to maybe even close the room, if you think so? Karita? Any last words?
Just happy that this discussion continues, and I'll take on the challenge to write something about it.
Fantastic. Yeah,
I love
wonderful.
that. Thank you.
Yeah. Right. On,
Fabulous.
yeah, share it on the platform. We hope to see you registered there, and yeah, and contribute to the conversations, because, like I say, the conversations are valuable. The conversations are like, is what will move people. The authentic conversations that go on in venues like this is important. Yeah. Animah, over to you.
Wow. I want to thank Anna, Karita, and Jan for joining us and on stage and talking. I know it was mainly dominated by me, so thank you for your patience
Oh,
and
not at
listening.
all. Yeah, all good, all good.
Yeah, and I think it's events like this that kind of open people's eyes, and I realized. I do think the tide is changing, because actually there are not that many people who do support Ruby Ellis. We see tremendous amount of support for Omerso and the rest of the Spanish women football players, and I think that shows the tide is turning. People are understanding it so much better. What I found especially gratifying was the Spanish government themselves. The Prime Minister, no less. Right?
Yes.
I mean, that's incredible. So when you see leaders, stepping up, they may be men, but they're saying this, and I think that carries so much weight, and kind of validates. And we need to see more men in positions of power. Speak up on sexual harassment, speak up on misogyny, and so on. That's really important. I think I found that really encouraging, because I think since we saw the whole Weinstein expose, and then #MeToo really come into prominence, and more people talking about sexual harassment and other forms of sexual harm, and whether it was women against men. I think the more that we are having these conversations, the more awareness there is, and people start sort of examining their behavior and questioning it. So I find the dialogues around the Spanish case, for me, very hopeful and encouraging. And the allyship that's arisen is incredible, in Spain and elsewhere. I'm Animah and done speaking. Back to you, Bernard.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. Thanks so much, Animah. So I guess we've come to the end of, any last words from you, Jan? Anybody down in the audience? Yeah. We're going to close the room. Jan, sorry?
No,
Yeah?
just thank you for listening to me, and thank you for inviting me in.
Any day.
And I look forward to talking to anyone who wants to join Speak Up Network and the sexual harassment group.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jan. Thank you, Karita. Animah, thanks a lot. Yeah, and I guess the saga hasn't ended yet, has it? So who knows? Next week might still be talking about the same thing, unpacking, how it's kind of like really spiraled. We'll see. But thank you, everybody.